we're in our second tonight we're in our second class on Paul, and as I was saying there in the prayer, I consider this important, and it's amazing you can return to a study or topic of study in the scriptures again and again, and you always seem to see new perspectives or new levels in it. And as I've been doing Paul, preparing for these studies on the Fridays to these new ones. I've seen that Paul is so vital to our Christianity. I mean, he people dislike it, and you can see why, because he can have what appears an overbearing presence in the New Testament and in Christian theology. But once you begin to understand, I think, what his perspective was, you can see how the actual movement of Christianity has been so, if not determined, radically shaped by him. He really is. I mean, he's the visionary. Jesus is the source, of course, of our Christianity. It's he who carried it out, who carried it through with his ministry and the cross. But there's no one, there's never been, never before and never since has been anyone like Paul who latched on to the radical meaning of Christ the way he did. I mean, Paul's vision still exceeds our practice of Christianity, I think, and we're still on our way to it. And it certainly has shaped the modern world, as recent thinkers have begun to say, that Paul's universality that breaks all boundaries is very, very much at the heart of the modern world. So Paul is this incredible seminal figure in our Christian story and in our world story, but he didn't see himself that way. That he didn't see he was just this witness, the witness to, as I say, the apocalyptic Christ. That is the Christ who changed the nature of the cosmos. I mean, you don't have to believe that Christ changed the nature of the cosmos. I actually do. And Paul certainly witnessed that was what he saw. So you have to understand that that's what Paul saw. He saw this radically changed cosmos. And so he is this incredible figure that comes very early, as we'll see, within 3 years or maybe even less of Christ's death, of Jesus's death. And right there from the get-go, he saw the world as it was, passing away, changing. He saw it initially as kind of under the imminent threat of Christ's second coming in a very physical way, and actually a violent way. And that is part of the presentation that I'm going to make tonight, is that Paul initially had the imminence of Christ in the world as having changed the cosmos was because of his death and resurrection, and that meant that he was coming very, very soon to kind of wrap things up. And that had quite a large element of violence in it. And Paul, at that point, I think, was not aware of it. But progressively, he did become aware of it, and he backed away from that very considerably. And his perspective altered so that it was no longer a physical inbreaking in that violent way, but it was in some ways even more real, because it entered into the very fiber of what it means to be human, and that comes through the message of faith. But it's no less real and no less radical and no less transformative than if Jesus was really to come on the clouds tomorrow morning. And that's kind of the argument of this presentation, this course. But to get to that clarity, you have to have a timeline. I mean, that's the crucial thing. You can't see Paul going from kind of physical immanence to a inner transformation that amounts to the same thing, a transformed cosmos. You can't see him moving from A to B unless you have a timeline. And unless you understand that timeline in actually a pretty definite way, one that actually alters the years of Paul's ministry as they have been traditionally understood, and very much under the influence of the Acts of the Apostles. And we mentioned that last time. And we mentioned how the Acts of the Apostles essentially constructed a church history of Paul. They put Paul within an overall ecclesiastical or ecclesial context that made Paul part of the church history, rather than Paul actually redefining history himself through the apocalyptic Christ. And that's quite an argument, and that's quite a distinction. And it actually, in some measure, is a critique of the book of Acts. And of course, I want, as we get further into the discussion, you'll grasp that more and more. And of course, we want to hear everybody's opinion on this. I mean, it's my feeling, it's my opinion, but it's not as though I'm presenting this as carved in stone as some kind of doctrine that has to be adhered to. But once you do make these shifts, I think Paul becomes much more exciting, just to put it simply like that. So let me begin sharing screen here. If I can find where it is. All right then. Hold on a moment, please. I'm sorry. I thought I had done this, but don't worry. Don't worry. It's all going to be good. All manner of things will be great. And that is the wrong slideshow. Where is? That's the correct slideshow. Okay. I should have. Yeah. All right. Can you see this?
No. No.
Oh, you can't. Okay. All right. Right. Well, that's not good. Let me try again. Here we are. Where am I? Here I am. And okay, share. I mean, normally I'd be breaking out in a cold sweat here, trying to do this, but now I'm getting too old for that. So
Yeah,
all right,
okay.
here we go.
You
can see something?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
All right, okay, we'll go back from the beginning here. All right, there we go. Okay, here we are. This is the second class of 10 Letters of Paul, and how to teach and study the nonviolent message of Paul.
So you can see it.
So here we are. This is the question that I've introduced: creating a timeline for Paul. Although this might seem a secondary consideration to the content of Paul's letters, so that you have the letters and their teaching, it is in fact crucial. Unless we can place Paul in some measure in time and space, we have no idea of his possible progression as a theologian and a human being. He becomes simply a series of magisterial statements, as so many people hear him. And so without a timeline, Paul becomes a browbeater. All you hear is Paul going on about this, that, and the other. We kind of get tired of his voice. But when you begin, you give him a story and see how his voice actually changes, then it becomes much more interesting. So this is connected to last week's remarks on Acts, the Acts of the Apostles. And clearly there is a timeline in Acts. But as we have seen, and I've repeated, its purpose is to fit Paul into a frame of church authority, by which the mighty charisma of Paul is recruited to a church project. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. It basically has carried the Christian movement, shall we say, for best part of 2,000 years. And certainly our understanding of Paul's journey, his story, has been that as given us by Acts. And you'll see, if you go online and Google the journeys of Paul, they'll come up immediately. I mean, every church, every separate denomination puts out these images of Paul's journeys because they're so physical, they're so real, and they're stage 1, 2, and 3, and then even 4 when he goes to Rome. That it becomes a kind of part of a romance that an historical romance that we all kind of know about. But what we're saying here is that has in some ways prejudiced our reading of Paul into an ecclesial project. And I quote here from Hengel, I think his name is Martin Hengel. He's a renowned German scholar. A lot of his work is translated into English. And even though he's a supporter of the Acts of the Apostles, he says the order of salvation history and church politics weighs more heavily than historical reality in Acts. So that's quite a statement. The order of salvation history, to get the salvation history right, how God is managing God's project to save humanity. And that word salvation, there's a lot that hangs on that. And church politics, the way the church is seen and the way the church becomes the central organizational and institutional feature of Acts of the Apostles. This weighs more heavily than historical reality. And that's a gentle way of saying it. It doesn't say it distorts historical reality or bends it away from its original path. It says it weighs more heavily. So that's basically a conservative biblical scholar speaking there. So we know that this is known by scholars and recognized. But once you see that, does not this run the risk of losing the intensity and immediacy of Paul's experience? And that is my argument. That once you understand that his story has been shaped by basically the needs of the ecclesial institution, this loses the immediacy and the vitality of Paul's own story. And because we're at so I'm not saying this gratuitously as well, or not necessarily gratuitously, but like an academic, a lot of academics could say this, critical academics, and they do. I mean, many are not as reserved as Hengel in his book on Paul, or that book on Paul, 1997. But people have said this, but what I'm saying is that it's necessary. My argument and my approach here is that it's necessary to say this because of the crisis of times that we're in. So we need to get back to the immediacy of Paul's apocalyptic experience in order to face as Christians the times we're in. That's my argument. So in building this timeline, as you'll see very shortly, and it was hinted at last week, a vital question is the period of 14 years following Paul's first 3 years as a Christian. And we'll read that again from Galatians. So we'll get our heads into it. But there's these two separate periods of time. One is 3 years, and the other is 14 years, and they're mentioned in Galatians chapter 1 and through to chapter 2. But specifically those verses 18 to 1. And the first 3 years are directly after his conversion. And then after 3 years from his conversion, he goes to Jerusalem and he has a meeting with Peter and I think James. He says he saw James at that point. And then he doesn't go to Jerusalem again for 14 years. So that cumulatively, that is 3 plus 14, that's 17 years. And his second visit to Jerusalem after those 17 years is universally understood by scholars. If you look at the scripture yourself, you can see that the two things align so well, they can't be separated. It's universally agreed by the scholars and by your own observation that 17-year mark visit corresponds to what is known as the Council of Jerusalem. Now, of course, Luke works that council up really into a great council where the elders are present. There's various speeches, there's reports. I mean, it is a genuine kind of like senatorial conference. And the decision, as we all know, is made that's chapter 15 of the Acts of the Apostles. The decision is made there not to require the law, especially circumcision, from Gentile converts. So that's a huge thing for the emerging church, that is no longer a Jewish movement, even though Jesus, you could say Jesus is part of that. Jesus is the Son of Man. He's going to return, but still it belongs within the parameters of Jewish practice, including the law, and then an outer circle of God-fearers or proselytes. When you say that the Christian converts no longer need to be circumcised or keep the dietary laws, then you've blown the gates off. You're in a completely different universe, and that is entirely Paul's point, that Christ has blown the gates off of the whole kind of like first covenants, so to speak, and really of the whole condition of humanity. So the question is, what was Paul doing in that gap between the 3 years after his conversion, where he goes to Jerusalem the first time, and then 17 years after his conversion, when he goes to Jerusalem the second time? So that's 14 years. That's a whole, as I say, wodge of time. And it's not adequately explained at all in the Acts of the Apostles. So backtracking a little bit, and I hope you're still with me. Are you still with me?
Yes.
Good, good. Thank you. I got one vote there. I'm glad. So backtracking a little bit, we have this episode, which we talked about last time, which comes after Paul's conversion. And actually, he's Paul's Saul here initially. The name hasn't changed yet. So this is after his conversion in Damascus. So this is Acts chapter 9, which tells of his conversion. Saul became increasingly more powerful and confounded the Jews. And I would remind people that the word in Greek is equivalent to Judeans, the same way as we would say Israelis today. It has a distinctive geographical reference. It's not a race as such, but it's the inhabitants of Judea is his primary meaning, who may happen to be elsewhere, who lived in Damascus. He confounded the Judeans who lived in Damascus by proving that Jesus was the Messiah. After some time had passed, and that would be equivalent to the 3 years of Galatians 1:18, the Jews plotted to kill him, but their plan became known to Saul. They were watching the gates day and night, but his disciples took him by night and let him down through an opening in the wall, lowering him in a basket. And then he goes to Jerusalem. So the sequence is exactly the same as in Galatians. From that point in Acts, he goes to Jerusalem, but he says he's still unknown to the churches there, to the members of the church there in Jerusalem. And but when they find out that he's there, they want to kill him. And so members of the church tell him, or I mean, the Jews in Jerusalem want to kill him. And a member of the church says, you can't stay here, it's not safe. And so they send him off to Tarsus. So at that point, after 3 years, Paul disappears to Tarsus. So that's going to be round about the year 39. So we'll come back to that timeline in a moment. So I hope you're kind of holding all this stuff in your head, because it's important so we can get to discuss the timeline in itself. Now, this exactly the same story as about him being let down from the wall through an opening in the wall in Damascus is told by Paul himself in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and he says, and this is where I mean it's so Paul he's talking about all his hardships, the time he was flogged, beaten, whipped, shipwrecked 3 times, hungry on the road, all that stuff, as well as his mystical experiences. But he begins with this, and I think so because I think he begins with this because it was for him a particularly humiliating experience that he had to sneak away like this. That's why I think he begins with it. But he says, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, blessed be forever, knows that I do not lie. So he's swearing to this. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas guarded the city of Damascus in order to seize me. But I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped from his hand. Now, that is an incredibly important historical anchor point. That's witnessed in 2 sources there, in Acts and then in Paul himself, which he's swearing to. And he gives the historical notation of the King Aretas. Now, King Aretas is known from history, from other sources, and he was the king of Nabatea, of the Nabateans, an Arabian people who had their headquarters in the city of Petra, which is in modern-day Jordan, I believe. An ancient city, very wondrous city, apparently. And the King Aretas had actually grown recently in power and had been able to extend his authority, at least potentially, when we have no other source for this except Paul, but we know that he was able to extend his authority potentially as far as Damascus, because 2 things had happened. Philip, the tetrarch of whatever the name of the area that he was in charge of, it's Caesarea Philippi. I think that's where he was the tetrarch of that area. He had died in the year 34 CE. We know that. We know that Philip died in 34 CE. And then Herod Antipas, famous from the Gospels, the one who executed John the Baptist and then had Jesus appear before him on trial, Herod Antipas was defeated in battle by this King Aretas, who used the change of the kingdoms with this dying of Philip, the Tetrarch, to try to extend his power. And then we know from Roman historians that the Romans sent troops in the year 37 CE to quell Aretas. And it was in that year that the emperor died, Tiberius, and so the Roman general who was sent to quell him said, "Well, I don't have to do that anymore because the emperor has died. I don't have any orders anymore." But the fact is, he was sent in the year 37, so we know that Aretas was at the peak of his power at that point, in order enough for them to send Roman legions against him. And so we calculate, the historians calculated that his power in Damascus, such that a governor, and Paul has no reason for putting that historical notation in there, except that it's the truth, that there was some agent of Aretas who was chasing him, wanted to capture him. So this happens, that date is 36 CE. If Aretas is being attacked by the Romans in 37, and the king, the death of the king Philip the Tetrarch was in 34, then a good estimate of his power in Damascus, of his increase in power in Damascus, so that he would be able to chase down Paul, would be 36 CE. So that's an incredibly important anchor point in our timeline for Paul. So hold that in mind. And when I did my dissertation, it's just unbelievable. My reader, who was from Lemoyne College, and herself had a doctorate, because of the account in Acts, she did not know that Paul's dates were this early. She was surprised to learn that Paul was converted in 33, and he was a wanted man in 36 because of his preaching. I mean, Paul seems to come really after, everything in Paul comes after the council in Jerusalem in 49. And so people don't think that his timeline stretches way back from there to very close to the time of Jesus. So now returning to the Acts of the Apostles, we learn that if Paul was in Damascus, or we conclude that Paul was in Damascus in 36 CE, we ask, what did he do after that? According to Acts 9:30, he disappears to Tarsus. He goes to Jerusalem, and then they send him off to Tarsus. Then a long time after that, he returns to Antioch and goes on his first missionary journey. So this is something I just lifted from the web. This is standard opinion, that his first missionary journey takes place fairly shortly before 49 CE or AD, because it's in the wake of this that the conference in Jerusalem takes place. So you there have his first missionary journey. Now, if you look at that, you still with me?
Yes.
Thank you. If you look at this, you can see that Paul takes off on the first missionary journey after he's been for this inexplicably long time in Tarsus. He takes off from Antioch, goes to Cyprus. The Acts of the Apostles tells us that. Then he docks, or he makes landfall in this place called Italia, and then Perga in the region of Pamphylia. And then he goes up to Pisidian Antioch, which is quite a ways into Asia Minor. And you can see the ancient denotation of Asia is up there. And then he makes his way back through Iconium and Derbe, and finally back to back again to Italia, and takes ship back to Antioch. what we notice there is, well, all right, I've got to stop here now. Well, hang on, I'll go to the next one because it gets very interesting. What we notice there is that the whole region around Tarsus, where he's supposed to have missionized, is not mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles. All he does is he goes to those other places on the coast of Asia Minor, and then up to Pisidium, Antioch, and then over to Iconium. Now, I just want to place this before I get to the really interesting questions. I want to place this in the context of all Paul's journeys. Again, lifted from the web. It's very. You don't have to concentrate on this in great detail. You can see there the purple is the first journey, the one I've just rehearsed, where he goes. Can you see my cursor, my pointer there at all? He goes.
No.
You don't see it. Oh, all right. Anyway, you got the purple. Just follow the purple line. It's the same thing as I just showed you. And then the second journey is the important one that thereby hangs the whole question that we're advancing here. The second journey takes place after 49, after the Council in Jerusalem, and he goes, all right, if you follow that brown line, shall I call it brown or beige, whatever, it follows up and goes back through some of the territory in Asia Minor, and then gets over to that city on the Aegean coastline, Troas. Do you see that at all? Do you see Troas? It's in the Aegean Sea on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
Okay, so then he has a dream, and this is the Acts of the Apostles. He has a dream that tells him he wants to, apparently he and I think it's, I forget who his companion is at that point. Is it Barnabas? Maybe. His companion, they want to missionize further in Asia Minor, in modern day Turkey. But this dream tells him that he needs to go across to Macedonia. So in the Acts of the Apostles, that moment after 49 and after this second journey is really important. It's the transition from Asia to Greece. And that's marked by this dream whereby he's told by an angel that he has to go to Greece. So the writing of the Acts of the Apostles knows that this is a big step. It's a big step to go from the traditional ancient Near East, of which Turkey was a part, and go to Greece, from which came the Greek conquerors, the Hellenizers, Alexander the Great, and then ultimately from further west still, the Romans. So this is a break from the ancient world, and it steps essentially into Europe. And Luke has that happening after 49. And you will note, although I really can't show you in detail. Well, you can see, if you can see Philippi and Thessalonica. Philippi is the furthest town to the north there on that green and beige line. And then to the left is Thessalonica. And then going down, there's Athens and there's Corinth. So you have all those classic communities of his letters, and then over on the right hand side, you have Ephesus, which would be happening contacted on his third journey, and the region in the middle is Galatia. So my point is that all those cities or areas that he visits in Acts all come from the second journey onwards, after the Council of Jerusalem. So you can see how Paul is authorized to step into really Gentile territory and into really essentially enemy territory. It's where the Greeks are. It's where the Romans are. These empires that have taken over the Mediterranean for 300 years, and then they're unstoppable. It's really only after the Council of Jerusalem that he makes the move really into the heart of this Gentile territory. So you can see how Acts of the Apostles is setting up Paul's ministry in these emerging, by the time he's writing, these are emerging Christian communities and churches, is setting it up all as a result of the decision taken by the collective leadership in Jerusalem, and that's basically the hierarchical leadership, because Peter and James himself gives the final word, and James, who is not an apostle appointed by the Lord, is only an apostle afterwards, after Jesus' death. All this comes after that. So you can see how his classic ministry, denoted by his letters, comes after 49. So now we get to the timeline, and then I'm going to stop and because we need to draw breath. But here's the timeline which I'm suggesting here. So 30 CE, crucifixion of Jesus, right? It's one or two alternative dates, 30 or 33, and I prefer 30, but that's not to be discussed. That's not for our discussion here. 33, Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus. 33 to 36, immediate evangelization, as we read in Acts in the Apostles and as we read in Galatians. Paul turns immediately to evangelization in Damascus, and in Acts is regions south and east of that, Arabia, possibly Petra under Aretas, which would partially explain perhaps why Aretas' agents were after him. Then 36 again, return to Damascus and escape from there, and his first visit to Jerusalem. Then he says in Galatians, which we will return to, he evangelizes in Syria and Cilicia. Those two areas, go back there, you see, Paul talks about those two areas, Cilicia and Syria, where Antioch is. He talks about them in the letter, his letter to the Galatians, in that first and second chapter. Acts does not mention any visit in that area in the first journey. So Paul sees it very much in terms of initially the regions. He calls it the regions of Cilicia and Syria, and Acts, Luke just skips by them. So we have evangelization in Syria and Cilicia, and then this is the hypothesis I've been working towards, and I've been exercising your patience in order that we might get to it. Then it is not told us in the Acts of the Apostles, but in that first period before the Council of Jerusalem, he does already cross into Greece, into Thessalonica and Corinth, and he does not wait until the Council of Jerusalem to go there. But then he does go afterwards for a key meeting in Jerusalem, as he says, to make sure I was not running in vain. And the reason why, there are two reasons why I say that it's highly possible that he evangelized beyond, including Thessalonica and Corinth, is because, one, he has all this time, and we know Paul does not sit still. He does not sit on his hands. And two, once we get to the letters to the Thessalonians and their partly violent eschatology, it makes much more sense that he's writing to them earlier, around the year 4041. So when we look at the letters to the Thessalonians, it would make much more sense that they're really early, and that his initial contact with the Corinthians was also really early. His letters are later, but the first letters Paul writes are basically almost 10 years before the classic letters of the Corinthians and Galatians and Ephesians. So I'm going to stop there so we can just think about that briefly together. And here we are. Good to see you all again. I'm just looking at a screen with letters on it. It's terrible. But it's nice to see your faces. I hope I didn't make you suffer too much with all that. But are you getting some of the picture? Is some of the picture what I'm not? You don't necessarily agree, but are you getting?
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, to me, I mean, I've gone through this course a couple of times, and it just makes more sense each time we go through this material here, because
Because you're married to me. Come on.
Acts has like dominated there's been so much emphasis on Acts dictating the timeline rather than the internal evidence in the Pauline letters themselves. I mean, that's just what's happened. And if you see that Acts, Luke, just like, you know, they each have their own agenda and their own perspective, their own concerns, you know, at that time. And his writing after Paul, you know, it's about, you know, 20, 30 years later or whatever.
Yeah.
And his putting together the origins of the Christian community, you know. And so he's trying to show that everything is all harmonious, you know, everything's a harmonious approach here. And we're all on the same page right from the get-go. And at this Council of Jerusalem, everyone decided, yes, it would be a great idea to include the Gentiles. Go for it, Paul, you know. And it's like giving their sort of blessing on Paul to go ahead and do it. It's like he's given the remit to do that, you know. And because that's when the Council of Jerusalem was, it has to start from there. So then all of that ministry that Paul does is compressed into a very short amount of time. Whereas it would make much more sense that if he's been building up these connections and the churches have been, you know, have already been started, and the Jerusalem Council is more of a validation of what's already happening. And that's what human beings do generally anyway, in political sort of just you know, having worked in healthcare, things hardly ever start off with an idea and then someone puts the idea into practice. It's always you know, the institution catches up and endorses what's already moving and already happening. That's 99 times what out of 100 times what happens, rather than you know, the institution coming down and deciding, you know, it's the right time.
Yeah.
It just feels more human that's the way around. That's how it happened. And also, as you say, Paul is not, you know, right from the get-go, he's out there, almost day one, is out there evangelizing. He's not going to be just quiet for 10 years.
Yeah,
just waiting for the council.
The first century equivalent
to sort of tell
watching
him what
television
to do.
for 10 years, you know. But anyway,
yeah, I mean, you can understand why Acts is written that way, because they want to make it look harmonious and beautiful and orderly, because that's what we like when we read our histories. But it just makes much more sense to me, this reading of the timeline. And also,
okay,
I should
Gail.
say,
Yeah,
okay.
Gail?
Well, all I was going to say is, from what I know of Vatican II, that was true of Vatican II, that many, many people in the grassroots were doing the sorts of things that council tried to validate. And it didn't just come out of the mind of one person, John the 23rd, or group. It was a 20-year process or more in which people were making those reforms.
You're saying that before Vatican II.
Oh, yes, the
Yeah.
grassroots were moving in that direction. I know that from the biography I wrote of Sister Medalita, where she was very much involved in all of those, the School of Sacred Theology in the 40s, where they were looking at these things.
Yeah. So there's a very serious ferment that then creates the conference.
Yes, and then it's validated or not by what happens.
Yeah, right.
Is that what's happening now?
Go ahead, Sheila, go on.
Isn't that what is happening now?
In what way? What do you mean?
Well,
Sorry.
groups are forming, and attitudes and new ways of looking at things that are not necessarily of the establishment, but will become so.
I very much hope that's the case, especially in regard to violence, that as an issue, that is now the bubbling up
Yeah.
of something that will be validated in Gail's terminology and Linda's, validated at the highest levels, and then become very, very serious. But I think what we're talking about this way round, where there's a ferment underneath, and of course the argument here is that Paul is absolutely critical to that ferment. He's the most powerful voice for that ferment. If you could think of a voice, I don't know. Anyway, but he is this prophetic voice for this change, this radical change, and we'll get back to that. Gail, sorry, Claire.
I was just going to ask, following on from what Linda and Gail have both said, is the implication then, by focusing on Paul in terms of showing the wrong way we go about having a static church, like something that is built on a rock and never changes, versus a church that is constantly evolving, becoming, because it's the people, as Gail has said, it's the people, so it's constantly evolving. And is this the reason why it's really important to go back to Paul to show that one of the founders, if you like, or one of the key influences was in fact exactly what Gail is saying, that it is a churches of the people, and it's an evolving church. It is a church of our times.
I think that is absolutely
set in stone.
Absolutely correct, Claire. I mean, as we go forward, I think what we'll see is Paul has this absolutely electric view of what Jesus has done. Is buzzing with 100,000 volts, and it burns its way through the what he will call works, and we'll have to look at that, what that was. But he means the operations, the operationality of Judaism. That's all burnt through by the new truth, the new feature of features a weak word, but the reality of Jesus dead and risen. So he has this incredibly, it's burned on his retinas all the way through to the back of his brain, that there's something radically new here. And he does not, the whole point is what you're saying, Claire, he will not tolerate any opposition to it. That's what makes him very, very difficult. He will not see a middle way. His viewpoint becomes the dominant standard establishment viewpoint from in the latter part of the first century, but it definitely wasn't the standard viewpoint in those first decades. I mean, if you think about it, his break with Judaism, while still being a Jew, was enormous, and he sees that all the old modes are done with, and something radically new. And so what we're doing, and I think it's to your point, Claire, what we're trying to do is reconnect with that experience of the kind of divine discontent, the divine stirring of the waters, the stirring this thing up, because we need it for our time. The establishment accounts do too much to stop that sense of transformation that Paul first experienced. Linda, you wanted to say something. I'm going to let you say something because Mac wants to say something, but then go on. Go ahead, Linda.
I was just going to say that if you squish all of those, if you use the Acts timeline, everything gets squished down into just a few years. And so when you're talking about the different style of, like the core message of the letters changes, which is what your argument is, that there's an evolution in Paul's thought.
Yes.
From violence to absolute non-violence of God. That makes much more sense if you can separate those, the Thessalonian letters, and have them early, when he's, fresh off the boat kind of thing, and then as he becomes more reflective, you get the core letters, and then it just seems to fit more than why would you have such different issues if everything's all collapsed in just 2 or 3 years or whatever it is.
It's about 7 years. 7 years overall. Okay, so Mac, thank you, Linda. Is Mary waving at me?
Mary's up, yeah. So right. Mac and then Mary.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So I think this new timeline is exciting, and it's certainly very consistent with what we read in Paul's letters, and it helps us to understand how Paul's thought probably evolved over his time as an apostle. Are there other people besides you and Douglas Campbell who have accepted this timeline in the current biblical scholarship?
So there's a couple of German scholars whose names I can't recall, but I could get them for you. It is definitely a minority point of view, but it's known. I think if you could go to Wikipedia, it actually has a name. What do they call this viewpoint? I mean, it's probably discussed. I'm sure it's discussed in the Society of Biblical Literature, SBL conferences. It has to be, but it's called. It's called the revisionist. This is the revisionist point of view. That the timeline is revised quite seriously. So it is a minority perspective, but it's not just me, and it's not just Douglas Campbell. There are others.
And it's
so
it's relatively new, isn't it? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, there's always people in the 19th century come up with things, and then they're forgotten, and then someone rises. He already said that a long time ago, but mostly it is relatively new. Yeah. Mary Skinner, we don't see you. Are you there? Ah, there you are. You have to unmute, Mary.
Yeah. Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can. Yes, thank
Okay,
you.
good. Sorry about that.
No.
Is there any other source besides Thessalonians to back up this viewpoint? Since this
Well, once we get to Thessalonians, there is a very strong element of internal evidence that suggests the year 40 as a date. Once we get there, and I'll tell you in a nutshell what it is. It's the action of Caligula, Gaius Claudius, whatever his full name was, but he's known as Caligula, who wanted to install a statue of himself in the Jerusalem temple in the year 40, and he gave orders to a Roman general who assembled a very serious force and got as far as, I think it was Sidon in Phoenicia with that force. And then he was wintering, he delayed it because he knew it would create all hell in Jerusalem should he do it. But in Thessalonians, Second Thessalonians, which I actually take as earlier than First Thessalonians, but that's neither here nor there. But I mean, I think they're both authentic letters, and he calls it the lawless one. And we know what is restraining the lawless one. He gives this very oblique hint that there's something going on, and I've told you about it in private, but I can't write it down. And that's all in the second chapter of Thessalonians 2, Second Thessalonians, second chapter. So that's very, very strong internal evidence, because without that, that passage becomes more or less inexplicable, and then it's mythologized. Even today, it's mythologized by no less than Peter Thiel.
Oh, no.
Peter Thiel uses that, and it does get my juices rolling, it does. But he uses that as the necessity of the restrainer of the Antichrist, who in his view is Greta Thunberg, because she wants to impose universal restrictions on technology because it's burning the world up, etc. And so there needs to be a restrainer on the lawless one. And he's getting this from, I mean, God forgive us all, because we're all implicated. He's getting this from a Nazi jurist called Carl Schmitt. And so you can see that rolling interpretation that's gone on for 2,000 years of the second chapter of Second Thessalonians, of this mythological figure containing the Antichrist, when actually it is totally rooted historically in an actual event of a crazy Roman emperor by the name of Caligula. So that's, I give him my best hand away, but that's my internal evidence that you have to root the Thessalonian correspondence in the year 4041.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
That's a lot earlier than Acts puts it.
Hugely
Oh,
early,
yes.
because you've got to wait to 49 for the conference. And
And then
then,
he has to get there.
that's right.
And
So
then he has
what's
to establish a church to write a letter to.
Yeah,
So
exactly
he's
right.
got a lot of work to do,
He's got a lot of work to do. Yeah,
And Acts isn't written until 85, so
That's
there
right,
could be
yeah,
also a
80.
lot of distortion between those years.
that's exactly right. And of course, Luke is writing a history for the time of the Gentiles. He says Jerusalem will be trampled on until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. He sees a long period. He is prospecting the age of the Catholic Church, essentially. I mean, Luke and Acts are, and I mean this kind of like in ancient terms, are the Roman Church viewpoint. Whereas Paul is talking about the collapse of time itself into something radically new. So you can't have both those things. You can't have the long extended age of the Gentiles and then Christians being the people who embrace the radically new because it's right in our faces. So, oh, hi, Heather. I didn't see you. Anybody else? Anyone else that has any comments on this timeline or the evidence for the timeline? The thought of the timeline, the thought of changing the timeline, so that those really what they call years of shadow from about 36 through to, well, yeah, Luke says there is a first missionary journey before the Council of Jerusalem, and that takes place 47, 48. So it's really 36 to 47. It's about 10 years, which are completely occluded in the story. What was Paul doing in that time? What would you guess someone like Paul, from your first-hand sense of that guy? What was he doing for 10 years?
Well, he wouldn't have to go to other countries in order to find Gentiles.
No, that is true. But I think he did. I think I mean, well, we'll see some evidence that he felt that he had to go, he had to travel. Anyway, let's return to our sharing, if I can. Trouble is, when you move your cursor, all sorts of unwanted things pop up, and it's a real pain. I can't get rid of it. Okay, hang on. And everybody's waiting for me. There we go. All right, so here we go. Okay, so here's it. I mean, we're going on with the argument here, and there's only about 3 more slides. But anyway, so the argument against
Okay.
an early Greece timeline, that's what I'm talking about there, like that he did go to Greece, and he did in those 10 years, he would not have waited. He would have made that shift that the angel said he had to. He would have made it earlier. Is that in Galatians in chapter 1, verse 21, he just talks of I was in the regions of Syria and Cilicia. And he does not mention Greece. Now that's a serious consideration. And once we get out of these slides, we're going to read that whole passage, because we'll read it now with more intelligence, more focus about what we're looking at. So the argument against that would be that Acts itself easily extends these regions in the first journey to include Pamphylia and Pisidia. So Luke wasn't that, even though Paul apparently says just the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and he may have had his reasons in that letter not to mention Greece, and we might come to that. And it could be that those regions are meant in a very generous kind of geographical sense. They extend quite far. And then more substantively, is what Linda's saying, without this timeline, all Paul's letters are compressed basically between 50 CE and 48 CE, giving very little time for development of thought and understanding. With the timeline, the composition of letters is extended over approximately 15 years, from well, maybe even more, but from something like 41 to 55, 56, 57, something like that. So it gives much more time for Paul's corpus of letters to develop. So this is something else. This is very interesting, and it's in respect of what Mary said just there. So this is something that Luke in Acts gives us in chapter 22 of Acts, when Paul is giving his third account of his conversion. And right there, I mean, just as an aside, anything that's mentioned 3 times, we know in the New Testament or the Bible generally is mentioned 3 times, because we're telling the reader, the audience, that this is divine, is of divine origin. You got to take it absolutely seriously. So Paul gives an account of his conversion 3 times in the Acts of the Apostles. And this is the 3rd time he's doing it. And he says, these are his words: after I had returned to Jerusalem, so that's from Damascus, 3 years after this conversion, so that's 36. This is what he's talking about. After I had returned to Jerusalem, after they tried to kill me in Damascus, and while I was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance, and I saw Jesus saying to me, this is wonderful stuff, because the temple's still there. It hasn't been destroyed. Paul has a sense of the temple, but he's like Isaiah, who sees the Lord lifted up in the temple. He sees Jesus. And Jesus says to him, hurry up and get out of Jerusalem quickly, because they will not accept your testimony about me. Then he said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Now, far is just one adverb, and it's in the Greek it's makran, from makros, macro, meaning a great distance. But right from the get, if this is a spiritual account that Luke knew, because apparently he accompanied Paul on his journey. So Luke doesn't give the spiritual account until chapter 22. He gives more of the practical account that the community in Jerusalem tells Paul in chapter 11. Chapter 9, you have to get out of here, you have to go to Tarsus. But here, in this account, Paul has a spiritual experience that tells him, look, you have to get out of here. They won't accept you, but I'm going to send you far away. So from the get-go, 36, before all those years, Paul's destination was afar. And he also says in Romans 15:20, I aspire to preach the gospel where Christ was not known. He's got to go to a place where no one has heard of Christ before, or there are people there who have not heard of Christ. He's pressed up against the Gentile world, and that's his account of the spiritual sense of his mission. So that's where the kind of slide thing ends here. And what we're going to do now is go back to Galatians and read that together, but now with a more informed understanding of what's going on, and try to get a sense of what Paul is talking about, especially overall, really. I mean, we're not getting into the details too much, although if someone wants to talk about the details, that's fine. Hi there, person. Hi, there's Chris, my coffee drinking buddy, and we're going to just try to get a feel of Paul as we get it from these letters, from this passage. So we're in Galatians chapter 1. So I want someone can read this. Galatians chapter 1, verse 11, and we're going to read all the way through to chapter 2, verse 10. I mean, there's interesting stuff afterwards, but it'll carry us too far away. We're just trying to think about the timeline basically here, and Paul's motivation. I mean, I want you to think about what's driving this man onwards. That's what I want to think about. So we're going to read chapter 1, verse 11 to 2, verse 10. Would someone like to take us away on that? Mac, please.
For I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel that was proclaimed by me is not of human origin. For I did not receive it from a human source, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. You have heard, no doubt, of my earlier life in Jerusalem. I was violently persecuting the church of God and was trying to destroy it. I advanced in Judaism beyond many among my people of the same age, for I was far more zealous for the traditions of my ancestors. But when God, who had set me apart before I was born and called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me so that I might proclaim him among the Gentiles, I did not confer with any human being, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were already apostles before me. But I went away at once into Arabia, and afterwards I returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I did go up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and stayed with him 15 days. But I did not see any other apostle except James, the Lord's brother. In what I am writing to you before God, I do not lie. Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still unknown by sight to the churches of Judea that are in Christ. They only heard it said, "The one who formerly was persecuting us is now proclaiming the faith he once tried to destroy." And they glorified God because of me. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up in response to a revelation. Then I laid before them, although only in a private meeting with the acknowledged leaders, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure that I was not running or had not run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not compelled to be circumcised, though he was a Greek. But because of false believers secretly brought in, who slipped in to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might enslave us, we did not submit to them even for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might always remain with you. And from those who were supposed to be acknowledged leaders, what they actually were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Those leaders contributed nothing to me. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel for the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel for the circumcised, for he who worked through Peter, making him an apostle to the circumcised, also worked through me in sending me to the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John, who were acknowledged pillars, recognized the grace that had been given to me, they gave to Barnabas and me the right hand of fellowship, agreeing that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. They ask only one thing, that we remember the poor, which was actually what I was eager to do.
Okay, thank you, Mac. So we're going to return to Galatians in the course of the study of the letters, and
Can you, Tony, can you remind us when in your timeline, this was written?
well, yeah. So here's the thing, Cheryl. This has to be written after the initial evangelization of the Galatians and after the Council of Jerusalem, because Paul is talking about a meeting which corresponds absolutely in theme and outcome to that council. So he says clearly here that it was a private meeting, but he does say it's after 14 years. So it brings us to that, and it's the dating that we get. It's really from this that we get that dating. So the Council of Jerusalem is this pivot point in the year 49. And Paul is obviously writing this after that because he says he's detailing the story of what happened there in that council. He says, although he says it's private, it goes to some length to say the agreement. So it's not impossible that there were actually two meetings, but one, like we were saying before, confirmed kind of like private discussions that had gone on with Paul, but Luke has Paul show up at the meeting physically, which directly contradicts this. But whatever, we have this. We have the same pivot point of 49. So this has to be written sometime 50-51. Cheryl. And it represents what is called the Judean, the crisis of the Judaizers. So Paul is hit with two major crises, and this is kind of looking forward to the letters, but what he's hit with a crisis in Corinth, which dismisses his leadership. They think he's weak and he's not cool. He doesn't speak very well, and he's not as cool as other people. And he has to reassert his authority in Corinth, and he does so very vigorously, as we'll see. He asserts his right as an apostle over against Apollos and other people. So that's one crisis. The other, even bigger crisis is this: the crisis of Judaizers, that we see him confronting here and confronting in Romans, meaning to say that you're wrong, Paul. Christian converts need to keep the law, including circumcision. So there's a blowback. And then, that helps build the story. He goes to Jerusalem in the year 49. He gets the boss, basically Peter, and then James, he says, to sign off. And they're the most important people. Oh, he says also John. Yeah, he gets 3 of them to sign off. And he feels satisfied. But then when he gets out on the road, he finds out that there's emissaries come from Jerusalem. He says that, I think, those who came in to spy on our freedom, from James, I think he says it's from James, but we'll get to that. But basically saying that this gospel which I'm preaching, that you don't need the law because you have this transformative risen Christ, they're trying to take that away from you. And so that's a huge crisis. And it's very persuasive. It's persuasive for people because people like rules. And we'll get to that because they like rules because they tell you who's in and who's out. If you have a set of rules and you're in, then those on the outs are on the outs. They're bad. And that's basically what was happening to Galatians and also in Rome. And that's why he writes the letter to the Romans. We'll see that it's like a preemptive letter trying to deal with that issue. So that's the major, there's a blowback against his gospel. So on the one hand, he goes off and preaches it. And then he has to get, he has to say, yeah, I'm still one with the cool guys in Jerusalem. And then he goes and preaches it some more, and then he then still has to be affirmed that he's not running in vain in the year 49, and then there's a pushback against it by these Judaizers. And we'll get to all of that as we go through the letters. It becomes very vivid that he's battling with the meaning of the gospel. He says the gospel overcomes all the rules. The rules don't apply anymore. You're in a new place. It's that what counts, because that changes your humanity. That's what changes your character as a human being. You need rules if you're not changed. Otherwise, you're like a child. You say, you can't play with that stuff. It's dangerous, Whatever, you need rules for children. But if you grow up, and this is Paul's argument, you don't need rules anymore because you have the Christ who embraces you in this entirely new relationship. So I hope we're getting some idea of the, first of all, the timeline, but then also, because it's come up now, the pushback that he experienced.
And I think next week, Cheryl, the focus of the study is the chronology of the letters, so that's gonna.
Yeah, we will do that in more detail, but yeah.
So, and there's sort of
what do you feel about Paul here? I mean, and even given that what that discussion then led to with Cheryl about the pushback, what do you feel about this guy? I mean, would you follow it?
I feel like it's a.
Go
ahead, Heather. Go ahead, Heather.
Heather and Gail.
I feel like he's just trying to defend himself, that he's zealous enough, that he's the real deal. He's trying to say against the zealots are the real the real holy people.
They are holy, yeah.
So I think, like, obviously he's not a zealot. He was a zealot, and then he is having this transformation. So he's trying to communicate that he's not a zealot, but he is the real deal. You know, that's what I got.
Yeah, well, that's difficult. That's a difficult argument to make.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we try to make that same argument now. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Gail, thank you, Heather. Gail, can't hear you, Gail. Gail, I can't hear you.
In our little African American oriented church, which accepts us white folks, we sing Jesus on the main line, tell us what he wants. And I think what we see is Paul is on the main line and he's saying those apostles got it one way, but I got direct message.
That's right.
I'm here to tell you that no human being can contradict me because what I see is absolutely true. Now, if you're James,
Now, what do you think of that? What do you think of that?
well, time will tell. And it seems to me that if I had heard that and I had been formed like a bonsai by my traditions and my culture, it would be very hard to hear. And it's very hard for anybody going into, like Dan and I, going into a culture to worship in a Catholic church that was so European. And here we are with all these African Americans on the west side of South Bend. You got it. I mean, you believe there's something there or you wouldn't stay. And what he's trying to do is make his way out of no way. And it's I think it's through, I'm just trying to think of what would have made him acceptable. And I think it had to be the authenticity of who he was and what he was saying. Otherwise, he would have been cast out.
And he was. I mean, he was attacked on numerous occasions.
Yes, that's true. But I don't, well, I just.
And he survived. I mean, the thing is, he survived and he didn't stop.
In a basket, if no other way. And I'm just hoping that I will recognize the truth.
Yes, amen. Amen, Gail.
When it's revealed.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. And because it is that personal modeling and an example that we're seeking. Like, and as you say, it's hard to take. I mean, for a Gentile who'd never had any of this before, it wouldn't be hard to take. And that's what he got in Corinth. I mean, he got a lot of acceptance in Corinth initially, but then they got off on that. They kind of become exalted on that message, and he had to tamp that down. he started to free people on the one hand and push down on the other hand, because he says, no, it's the crucified Christ that this is about. It's not you become overwhelmingly full of yourself because you've got the Spirit. So he's fighting these two different battles, and it's difficult for him. And but then as a result of that, he writes these incredible letters that are so dense, but they do exactly that. They express the enormous conviction what you've just articulated there, that there isn't another way.
No.
Linda.
Well, I was just struck in reading that passage just how authoritative he was. I mean, he's telling the story, and this is 14 years later, he went back to Jerusalem. He's taking Barnabas and Titus with him, so he's got his posse with him, and again, that doesn't really fit if he's been like in the Shadowlands all that time, so he's got his people with him, and they're one of them, obviously people are pushing back and saying, why isn't he getting circumcised, Titus? And he's saying, we're not going to do that. And then he goes on and says, and from those who are supposed to be acknowledged leaders, what they actually were makes no
There's a
difference
lot
to
of
me.
sarcasm there. Yeah, right.
God shows no partiality. They contributed nothing to me. I mean, he's already got a lot of authority. He's going in, and wouldn't get that if you were just lying fallow somewhere. You get that because you carry that with you. He's done the work. He's got the people with him, and they've got a strong sense of what their mission is. And they're kind of, he's going to get the approval almost, or the stamp of approval, but hardly not needing it in a way, but he's kind of wanting it.
He doesn't want to break solidarity. He doesn't want to break.
Yeah, he wants to be in fellowship with them,
yeah.
But he's not going to surrender what he thinks he needs to be doing.
Uh-huh.
And so he's happy that they approve of what he's doing. But I think it is what he is doing, not what they've just both sat down and decided he should be doing. I mean, that's not the tone of that narrative. It's like he's already doing it, and he wants to get their stamp of, to remain in fellowship, so they're not like splintering, away.
Right, that's right. That's important.
And also the people in Jerusalem are asking him for money, donations. Send your donations our way because we're poor. So you would only, and he says, well, I was glad to do that. I want to do that. So you'd only sort of do that if you've got established communities that with money that are, I mean, I don't think Cephas and James are going to say to someone who's not actually got any backing or is completely starting out fresh here, oh, we'll let you do it, but make sure you send money our way. I mean, it's because he's already got established communities in wealthy parts of the world that he was happy to be able to agree to that, It sounds like, there's already established communities in existence by that point.
It sounds kind of modern, doesn't it?
So, just to shift the frame a little bit so that we can understand again deeper, what would Peter, I would put James aside for a moment, but what would Peter have felt about this guy coming in and doing exactly what you're saying, Linda, with authority? I don't really need your approval, but I don't want to break fellowship with you. And this guy was not with Jesus in any of the things that we read in the Gospels. He did not start out in Galilee. He was swanning around somewhere or other, listening to Gamaliel, I suppose, learning in the temple, but he wasn't paying attention to Jesus. It's kind of interesting exactly where he was at that time. But he wasn't paying attention to Jesus, and he wasn't a follower of Jesus, and he probably seriously looked down on this little messianic cult that their leader got crucified, and to such an extent that he wants them to beat up and drive out and even kill the followers. And then he shows up and he tells Peter, you don't really know what you're talking about. I do.
Well, the thing is, though, that Peter ends up in Rome. So,
well, yes, he does. Yeah, it does.
So he mustn't have been that against. I think maybe James, because James comes across as much more the leader of the Jerusalem church.
Yeah.
But I think Peter would be somewhere in the middle. I mean, I think he would see
Peter was
both
told
sides.
by Jesus that you have to hold this whole thing together. So he may have felt it was his job. But anyway, Mac.
So Peter had started taking the gospel to the Gentiles with Cornelius, of course.
According to Luke, yes.
Right. No, you're going to argue about that, huh?
But no, I think it's true.
Okay.
But it does not predate Paul.
But at least by the Jerusalem Council, Peter had to have been at least in some way jealous of Paul because of Paul's success, and also probably put off by Paul's claim of independent authority to
Well,
him.
there,
and the
that's the
apostles.
thing. That's the thing.
Yeah. And I think you have to give Peter some credit for accepting it and seeing it as the work of God.
I agree.
Eventually. Yeah.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the passage directly after what we've just read says he had to confront Peter in Antioch because he would not eat with Gentiles.
Well, he was eating with him and then he stopped, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So,
Mm.
but I still think we
Why
have
did
to
he
give
stop? Why?
Peter-
Why? Just as a matter of interest, to clarify this, Mac, why would he have stopped?
Well, when he saw the James people, he got afraid and retreated back to the old habits of just
Yeah.
being
And
Jew.
what would the James people have said that influenced him?
That you are not a genuine Jew, and you need to be a genuine Jew to lead in this movement.
And to be a genuine Jew, you have to keep the rules, the law,
Yeah. Right,
and the law requires separation.
right.
I think I'm happy to see Peter as being someone who's been transformed by this journey. But as Mac pointed out, he's still very fallible and he goes flip-flops, as we know, but he's trying. So I'm quite happy to be.
Well, yeah,
Right.
oh, sure, like we all do, and that's for sure. But I'm still trying to say, well, no, as they say in the movies, where do you get off doing that? I mean, how can you possibly claim this authority to put? I mean, like if there was a young, sharp kind of like influencer.
I don't know. I mean, I think you're being a bit harsh on Peter personally because he did end up going to Rome if the story is correct. He did. I think my impression is that James, the brother of the Lord, the one who's establishes the church in Jerusalem, Peter is not gonna. I mean, he was a follower, a disciple, direct disciple of Jesus,
I
and that's
don't. I don't.
not
No,
gonna be nothing,
Peter's the hero. No doubt about it. He's a great man.
Right, and
I just
he did try. It's like he has that weak humanity thing going, and he's not got the absolute
so what is that?
drive, the
What
drive
is
and
Paul?
the and the
What is
and
Paul
the
see? What has Paul seen, Gail?
I know.
What has Paul
I
seen?
think what Paul has seen, and I wish I'd said this last week because it was very much on my mind. What I've always loved about Paul is he preached the unknown God. I think he's seen the unknown God. And I think that's what his secret is in some ways. He sees the God that Jesus saw, the Father who is filled with love and forgiveness and who has accepted him and chosen him. Of all the least who could be chosen, he was chosen. And that, in a way, in spite of all this, it sounds like pride and self-promotion, is a huge humility to have to have stripped out the carpet, the floor on which you stood, and you just trust to the fall. And for me, that to me says everything about Paul.
So what you have is this movement, this very concrete movement that we've read about in Mark.
Yeah.
It begins in Galilee. It's on the boats. They're looking for bread. There's miracles of bread, whatever, and they end up in Jerusalem, and Jesus challenges the temple, all very physical, real stuff, which Paul, by the way, is not actually doing here. He's going into the temple, so you can see how Jesus' action in the temple really wasn't very understood. But anyway, you've got all that very concrete stuff, and then Paul just like you're saying, claims a visionary sense of what this means.
Yeah.
And he's possessed. So you like Teresa of Avila and that kind of mystical tradition that has this sense, this personal, first person,
Yeah.
unmediated thing that they can tell others about. Paul has got this in spades, and he's got it in relation to this Jesus, whom this bunch of people did know and follow and loved. And he says, I understand what Jesus means more than you do.
Yeah.
Now he's the visionary that has to bend the original community, the primitive community in Jerusalem, which is being actually very faithful to temple and to a lot of them, to at least to the law, to the rules. He has to bend them around to basically say circumcision doesn't mean anything.
I think part of that is that Paul was very educated. I mean, he was sitting at the feet of Gamaliel, as you said, you know, this, and he was, you know, just more, he could think in ways, he's been educated to think in a way that probably fishermen and the brother of Jesus, you know, the tradespeople basically who were the early church in
I
Jerusalem.
think James is
So
a pretty
he's,
smart guy, but anyway, yeah, go on.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know much about
Yeah.
them, but my impression is that the church in Jerusalem was primarily, you know, very grassrootsy and, you know,
Yeah.
but I think Paul comes in and he's
they
had
lived with the environment of the resurrection, no doubt about it. I mean, that's what shaped
yeah,
them into the
and I mean,
temple.
but I'm just thinking that that what would give Paul that sense of that he can see this. I mean, just listening to Gail, and it's like you can see things if you're trained with education, you know, you can start seeing the enormous connections and how it
Yeah,
all
because
sort of fits into place.
he hates the whole thing to begin with. He wants to kill it.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean he's like a global thinker, basically.
He definitely is a global thinker.
Whereas
You know,
not many people do think globally. They think, you know,
yeah.
systematically or whatever. But I think Paul was a global thinker, and that is, I think, partly why he had that strength of conviction, maybe.
So the issue for us doing the study is to say to you know, as we go through, to begin to understand and see and say what that global thinking means for us today. You know,
Cheryl has
like
her hand up.
what he saw. Can we have eyes to see our own time in that way?
Yeah.
Go, Cheryl. Cheryl.
So I would just like to give a little bit of feedback here because what I've been thinking as this discussion has progressed, that having this history is kind of a miracle that we have it, first of all.
Why is that, Cheryl? Why is it a miracle? Not just
Because
running.
I mean, because here's the beginning of a movement. We actually have written documents about it. And so to me, and that it's stood, you know, it has passed down all these centuries, is a little bit of a miracle to me. It's just a miracle. And the fact that Christianity all over the world sprang from kind of this mess, because when I read this, I feel like this is kind of really messy, you know, and in terms of going back to Girardian thought, I mean, right away, we are involved in rivalries, and who is going to mediate the pathway to God, or who is going to mediate the original vision? And I think that the question for me that I have to ask is, I really I don't want anybody to mediate that for me. I don't want Paul to mediate that for me. I respect Paul and his vision, but if I'm going to eventually, eventually we have to say, well, can I have that same vision? You know, and can I be a visionary, or do I have to depend on Paul to be my visionary? And I don't want to depend on Paul or any of those people. They point the way, but it is up to us, all of us, to be visionaries, I think. And to, the mediation is that line direct to Christ and not to Paul. And so that's just kind of what I've been thinking about. It maybe is not totally relevant to everything you've been saying, but it's kind of what I've been thinking about.
I think what Paul does, I think that is relevant, because what Paul does, he raises that issue. What are you saying?
Mhm.
I mean, he says, I want people to be like me, not to mindlessly parrot me or imitate me, but to have the same experience as me and be able to see that thing that I'm seeing.
And so, but nobody could ever have exactly the same experience, because if whatever in whatever vision that Paul had on the road there, if another person having that same vision would bring their whole life experience to that and have a different experience, perhaps. I mean, not largely different experience, but in a way that was unique to each person. And that makes Christianity very messy, because we either are going to let somebody define it for us and follow their vision and their rules, and we're back to rules again, or we're going to say, oh, there's something wonderful here to experience, and that's the experience that I want to have. I don't want to have the experience of the rules. And so anyway, and I think that's, in terms of Gerard, that is what, I mean, I remember in Mac teaching that, the mediation line, in which it's either direct or it's indirect, and the direct line is always better. You want to go out and tell the world and say, now I had this vision, and everybody has to believe like me, and that's not even the truth either. Somehow, I just don't know if I
pass on that ability. You want to pass on that nerve, that muscle.
Right.
That
That's right.
People can do the same thing. Anyway, it's time now. People are quitting. It's time to finish. Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, everybody, and peace to everybody. And next week, we will try and construct the timeline of the letters. I mean, that's an important question. So we got a kind of timeline of his life, or a hypothetical one, and then we're trying to get a timeline of the letters, and then the week after that we will begin with Thessalonians. Thank you very much. Peace. Who's going to pray for us? Someone pray, please.
I vote Mac.
Oh, okay. Our Father in heaven, we thank thee for the gathering we've had tonight and for the insights which we have received. We thank thee for Tony, for his wonderful knowledge of the gospel. We pray that thy Spirit will be with us, that we might grow closer to one another and closer to you. We pray that you will give us a desire to live in love and wisdom. And we pray that you will continue to bless Tony as he teaches this class, that we might benefit from it. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mac. God bless. Love you, everyone. Peace. Thanks, Matthew, for showing up here and missing compliments.